Hi. Impact wrenches, the first time I tried them, it was like magic. You just don't feel any torque, anything, it just brrr, and you feel a bit of small vibrations, and even the very stuck bolts would get loosened up and unscrewed pretty fast. Or if you want to screw in something even into hard wood, they make it very simple. And I was very curious about how exactly they achieve that, and this video is exactly that. I will try to explain and demonstrate how impact wrenches and impact screwdrivers work actually inside. If you're interested, you can stay tuned. So I put some notes, and basically I wasn't sure how to best explain it, and so I think it's best to start by explaining how they don't work. Impact wrenches do not work, and the same goes for impact screwdrivers for the remainder of this video. They do not work by using a lever. But to make it clear and to explain how normal drills and other stuff work, which may also be interesting and help to understand this, I will start first by explaining the basic principle of levers. And so here we have one bolt that is stuck pretty snugly, pretty tight, and if I want to unscrew it, I cannot do it by hand. I can put a socket on it, and I'm not able to do it by hand, but if I use a lever, then I might be able to unscrew it. I can make this lever longer to make my job easier, and if that is not enough, I can use an even longer lever. And what this longer lever basically does, as opposed to using a smaller lever, is that it lets me, I did make a video about torque and force and other physics stuff. I'll put a link to those videos in this video's description, but here I will just briefly run over that, and so that you can understand the basics even without watching those videos, though I would recommend them. So anyway, by using a longer lever, if I make the same number of degrees of a turn, say I do 45 degrees, this small lever will make only this long of a journey, while the bigger one will, for the same amount of twist, let's try to demonstrate it. So for comparison, this bigger one, if I turn it also for 45 degrees, it will have made about twice as long journey. So with the same amount of strength and force that I can pull or push on it, if I make it go through a longer journey, it will take me longer, but I will be able to exert higher torque on the bolt itself by making a longer lever. So that is one way of making my job easier, by using longer levers. And of course there are hacks where you can take a big pipe and make your lever even longer, with some caveats that are beyond the scope of this video, why that's not always a good idea with tools. But again, that's beyond the scope of this video. But anyway, that is one basic principle. Now, another way to use the same principle is what we use on our bicycles. Let me check my notes. Yes, we will go over here and we can see a bicycle. I also have a video about bicycle gears and how to switch gears and gear ratios and articles. I also put those in the video's description. Maybe make some of them pop up in your top right hand corner if I don't forget. Anyway, with bicycle we are making the same thing here. Our lever is the crank, and we cannot make our cranks longer because there is a point related to drills, so stay with me. So we cannot make our cranks any longer when we are using a bicycle, because it will be impractical. We cannot make our legs make huge turns. Our biomechanics is not that efficient. We are basically, when we're pedaling, we are moving our legs up and down. The back and forth movement is minimal. We are more efficient at that kind of movement. So anyway, this is fairly limited by rider's height and leg length. So what we can do is that we can use a larger rear sprocket or a smaller rear sprocket. If we want to make our torque higher for the same amount of force that we exert, the torque on the rear wheel to make it make it more torque for climbing, we can shift to a larger sprocket in the rear, and that way when we make one turn of our cranks, the wheel or the sprocket will make fewer turns, and we will get a higher ratio, and vice versa when we shift to a smaller sprocket in the front. That is achieved because the cranks are turning the front chain rings, and for some bicycles, though that is now getting a bit old-fashioned, but it's still very efficient. Some bicycles like this one have several. This one has 3, some have 2 front chain rings. This is visible through plastic camera, might be able to catch it from the side also. So if we want to get faster speed for every turn, we shift into a larger front chain ring, and that allows us to have one turn move more, pull more of a chain, more links, and thus make more turns on the rear wheel. Vice versa, if we want higher torque, then we can shift to the smallest front chain ring, and in that case, for one turn of our pedals, we will have a very small number of chain links moved, and thus have the rear wheel move at a slower rate but with more torque. So by combining the front and rear chaining combinations, we can make our bicycle go faster, or let us exert higher torque on the rear wheel without having superhuman strength. Now, how does that relate to drills? Well, we have a similar thing on our drills, only it's even more compact. Here, when I was using these levers, it's pretty big. On a bicycle, we had those smaller cranks, and thanks to chain rings and chain transmission, it allows us to adjust the torque and the speed and everything. And here it is even smaller. I will maybe be able to find online some pictures and show how this looks inside. This is still under warranty. I don't want to disassemble it and don't have any old one here, but basically we have this sort of a switch, and that is some in a way a gear, like switching gears. Speed 2 lets this turn faster, but we have lower torque, and speed 1 lets it makes it spin slower, but we have higher torque. So if I want to use this to put some to drive a screw in some hard wood, I would use the speed number 1, and I would still have to exert some pressure on the handle to not make it turn, but to make it in fact screw the screw into the wood. So it's not very easy, but thanks to lower gear I can manage it. Though again, it's still very tiring. If I put it into higher gear, even if I don't get any skipping of the screw, I will have problems keeping it in line, and it may not have enough strength to drive it. So that's not optimal. That's used for drilling, the higher speed, depending on what you're drilling. So that is the normal drill. How does our impact wrench compare to that? Well, I will first use, to briefly right away tell you, it's using kinetic energy. So it's not using levers and gears and torques. In that case, it is relying on kinetic energy. And the simplest explanation of how kinetic energy works is by using a hammer. I will again refer to my physics video where I've explained these things already. But the principle is that if I want to drive a nail into wood, so this is wooden, I can put a nail and lean on it with all my weight on the hammer. And even if it doesn't twist out of the way, I will still not be able to do it, and it will be very tiring and so on, practically impossible. But if I don't use even 10% of my weight, just a flick of the wrist, and I give the head of the hammer speed, so kinetic energy, even though it's not very heavy, it's like 500 grams or less, I will be able to exert a lot of kinetic energy on that nail's head and drive it into the wood. So kinetic energy can, because it increases exponentially with the increase of speed, it can be very, very useful, and if you use it smartly, it can be a great thing. If you don't watch and hit your fingers, it can hurt. The same goes for cycling. So we have that kind of way of using kinetic energy. A bit silly way of using kinetic energy that I've seen people do, that I too have resorted to on occasions, and that can also work, leads us a bit closer to what the impact wrench does. And in this case, don't try this at home. I don't recommend you do this. Use other options, but you can use a hammer and kinetic energy to hit. If you want to unscrew something, I can put some preload on it and then use a hammer to try to use kinetic energy and to unscrew it. It's many things can go wrong when you're doing this. I don't recommend you do this, but the principle is there. If we put that principle into a smaller package, that is what we have here. You can see the difference in thickness. This one has gear ratios and drives, and this one uses something very close to what I have just demonstrated. So basic principle is this. I will try to get, I think that Bosch have made some videos showing what this looks on the inside, but basically your impact wrench has this shaft that is spinning. It has that kind of shaft, so this would be like that shaft, and that shaft has some sort of protrusions like these ones at an angle, and it has a hammer that is on the shaft also and spinning and a bit wider, and it is spring loaded. And so what happens is that the tool uses kinetic energy to make that hammer that is basically a spinning hammer, small but spinning at a very high speed, so that it has kinetic energy, and then it will slide down and hit the protrusion on the shaft, and then after it's exerted a huge percentage of its kinetic energy, it will bounce off and make another spin, gain speed, and on another turn hit again. And then it will, because it's at an angle, I will show a picture if I find the diagram. So it's like at an angle, so it will hit, make it turn, a part of a turn, then bounce away, and then regain speed, bounce back, and because it's spring loaded, and hit again. And that's what it does at a huge rate. And by making if I use this, let's try to show it. The more I press this, the faster it turns. The faster I make it turn, the more kinetic energy it gets exponentially. It increases with speed, and that is why the faster I turn this, the higher torque it can exert, either for screwing in or for unscrewing. So that is the basic principle. And I also want to explain another thing, and that was also to me very interesting. If I want to tighten a bolt to a certain number of Newton meters to give it a certain torque, or to unscrew a stuck bolt, the more I keep this pressed, the more torque I get. Well, basically because of the way it works, it's just like when you are using a hammer and you want to drive a nail into hard wood. You hit it once, it goes a certain way, then when you hit it again, it goes further. And that is why, in a similar way, this gains more speed the more you let it spin to a certain point, and also it gives you a bit more impact. So the more seconds you keep it, the more it will be able to, in certain small increments, tighten further, to turn the bolt further and thus further tighten it, creating more preload. So I also have a video explaining how the bolted connections work, and how turning of the bolt and what we measure actually transfers to the tightening force of the bolt that it makes on the materials that it connects. So that's the basic principle of that. And I wanted to explain another thing, if memory serves me. Yes, another caveat. Again, this was interesting to me, and I hope it will also satisfy someone else's curiosity too. These things can be very good when you need to screw things in and screw things out, but because of the way they work by exerting hits, not by putting constant torque. You need to have high quality bits that are designed for that. So this is not as hard. Let me show you the examples. So 19. Okay. So here, this is harder. It will not wear as much, but it will be too brittle to be used with impact wrench. If you want to use bits with impact wrench, you should use those that are rated for impact wrenches, and they are not as hard, but they are more, I think that the English word is that the material is more tough, ductile. I would have to look it up. There's an article on my website explaining the material properties of steel, and there it's all, but sorry for my imperfect English. So I will refer to that and put it in the video description. But basically this is more like ceramics or glass, and this is more like steel, to use that example. So more brittle, and it will wear less fast, but it can shatter if you use it with an impact wrench. Similar goes for turning in screws. You have these like special screwdrivers, special bit holders and bits that are rated for impact wrenches. And again, here we have a thinner section that is designed to compensate for those impacts that this tool makes and make this a bit more elastic, less brittle, wear faster but less brittle, so that it can stand up to that. But still, if you have an impact wrench, not an impact screwdriver, you should be very careful with what kinds of screws and bits you are using, because if you use too much torque, it can just shear it off, snap it, and you won't get anything done. And this is all sort of a good information, I think, good warning and educational and fun, but also a prelude to another explanation, another mystery. When you're screwing in bolts into hardwood, sometimes you need to pre-drill holes, and that means you spend more time, and you usually need to have tools and hands, so one for drilling and the other for screwing in, to not always be changing bits. But even when you pre-drill holes, depending on the length of the bolt that you're screwing in and the wood hardness and the thickness and everything, it will be easier to use an impact wrench or an impact screwdriver, but past a certain point, impact screwdriver may become useless. Why is that? Well, because the steel and the wood do flex quite a lot in terms of this problematic. We cannot see this flex very easily, but on the scale that is relevant for that, it does flex. Just like here on a bigger scale, I can make this easily show you how much it flexes, even though it's super hard. If I try to flex this one, this section, you cannot see it, but it's also flexing. It only depends in what scale we're talking about and what is our problem. But the principle stays. So what happens because of that flex? If I hit this, it will turn a bit, but it will also flex a bit as it turns. Let me use an example. Maybe this might be useful. So this can flex to a certain degree, and here, if I flex it, if I here keep a certain resistance with my hand, I will not make it stronger or weaker. I can make this flex a bit, and past that point it will start turning my hand, it will start turning. But for a certain amount it will just flex back and forth. And so when you are using an impact screwdriver or wrench to drive a screw into wood, if this difference between the screw's length and diameter is big enough, so a thin and relatively long screw, it will, past a certain point, once you drive it in halfway through, it will just be twisting back and forth, because the impact wrench does very fast, very hard hits, but it keeps hitting and turning in very small increments. Then you will just be doing this, and it will not be driving any further. Also, you might need to have a surprisingly strong impact wrench for driving things into wood, compared to using a normal drill screwdriver For example, if I have a screwdriver that gives me 30 Newton meters of torque, that's pretty big and pretty good and pretty useful for driving in screws into wood. But to get that amount of torque effective, if I'm using long screws into hard wood, I might need a 60 or even a 90 or 100 Newton meters impact wrench to do it, depending on how long and thin relative to its length the bolt is. So that is another caveat, and these tools can be surprisingly light and compact, impact wrenches, and they are very useful for working on constructions when you need to put in a lot of bolts. They make things easier. They don't exert any torque onto your arm when you're screwing things in and don't make you as tired, but it's important to keep these things in mind. So to use the proper drill bits and to make sure that you have enough torque and to not overdo it, and to know that there is a limit past which you might have to resort to something like this, perhaps with another arm, so a stronger model, or to pre-drill larger holes and similar. So that's the whole video. I don't think I forgot to mention anything, and thank you very much if you sat through this whole video. I hope you found this educational, maybe even a bit entertaining, hopefully, and I will see you in some other video. I want to take the time to thank good people who support my work via Patreon. I will make a video about this, but after the past few years of Patreon donations, I have decided against my plans to get a high quality vise. I'll make a separate video about that. And for this year, this is the beginning of 2025, I am saving for a normal action camera, hopefully to make some educational tutorial videos of riding and riding techniques and similar, with a bit of luck and good help. So those are my plans. I did plan to get camera right away, but the way things turned out, it was important for me to keep working, and I needed to make some changes. So that's where we are today, and I hope that for the future there will not be any unpleasant surprises. And that's it. That's the whole video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you in some other video, and of course, if you like this, you can bookmark and save BikeGremlin YouTube channel, the subscriptions tab in your YouTube, because the YouTube does not like promoting my videos in your feed when you just open it. You might also want to bookmark the BikeGremlin.com website with an index of all my videos. For any questions, comments, especially corrections, please use the BikeGremlin.net forum, because that, unlike YouTube, is easy to search, and so you can always find the questions and answers or comments or corrections with the time when you posted them and everything, and anyone else can find those, so it helps a larger number of people, and that is more efficient, and that is why I've now for about a year switched from answering questions on YouTube to answering them on forum only, or primarily at least. So I don't think I forgot anything to mention now. So again, thank you very much for watching. Cheers, stay cool.